May 27, 2014. It's just before morning twilight in the Atlanta bedroom community of Venetian Hills.
Venetian Hills is an urban environment, predominantly hard-working, middle-class community.
It serves as a very good place for persons who work within the city.
But just after 3 a.m., as many residents are getting their last moments of sleep, the quiet night is interrupted by a harrowing 911 call.
I need ambulance, please. I go to the bedside.
Okay, is she awake?
No.
She frantically begs them to get there quick because her sister is dying.
Okay, she's saying she's unconscious? Okay, breathing.
The caller, LaToya Jackson, provides the address of her mother's apartment where she and her sister Rashawn had been staying the night.
Atlanta police officers and emergency medical technicians rush to the mother's apartment.
When they arrive, first responders find Rashawn unresponsive on the floor, surrounded by her devastated mother and sister.
We're gonna do everything we can do.
Responding officers start immediately providing rescue techniques. And it's critical because every second counts when it comes to trying to save someone's life.
As Rashawn's life hangs in the balance, her family is left wondering what evil has infiltrated their home and why was Rashawn the target. Born and raised in Atlanta, 34-year-old Rashawn Jackson was always known for her kind and generous spirit.
People really loved her and gravitated toward her. She was a very devoted daughter, a very loving aunt.
She liked going shopping, buying gifts for her nieces and nephews. She loved every last person that she's around. She's just that type of person.
Rashawn also understood the value of hard work.
She was a manager at a popular Atlanta restaurant.
She was a good employee. You know, she would work all the time, very dependable, very trustworthy.
The first time I met Rashawn, I just started working at the Chick-fil-A Dorf House, and she was a leader there. She's very outspoken. She loved to teach, so I can go to her about anything. She's very easy to talk to. She was funny at times, and I just loved being around her.
Even with all her success, Rashawn dreamed of having someone to share it with.
Rashawn was also very optimistic about love. She wanted to find someone that she could share life with.
And when Rashawn met a man named Maurice Nesbitt in 2009, it seemed as though she'd finally found her match.
Excuse me, how you doing? I know you're not leaving already.
They initially met at a club. He approached her.
Yeah, I actually got to get up early in the morning for work.
So what's your name?
It's Rashawn.
Rashawn, I'm Maurice. It's nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you, too.
Rashawn was intrigued by Maurice's bold personality and charming demeanor.
On his mother's side, he was Hispanic. His mom still resided in Mexico, and Maurice was actually bilingual.
He was good looking, he was charismatic, and she was drawn to all of those things about him.
Can I trouble you for one more dance before you do?
Okay, just one?
Just one.
Instead of catching her ride home, Rashawn decided to head back upstairs with Maurice and never looked back.
They ended up dancing the night away. After that, Rashawn was smitten.
They got to know each other. They started dating.
She was drawn to his character, his personality, the way he made her feel.
But Maurice wasn't just charming. He was also talented.
Maurice was an up-and-coming rapper. He had some popularity in the city of Atlanta.
He went by the name of Mega Ruckus.
He had some videos that he put out, and he was gaining some traction.
He even had a video with Young Thug, who was rising in his popularity in Atlanta at the time. He was moving in those circles.
The Atlanta rap scene is kind of the mecca for rappers trying to make it in the South. Maurice made lots of music videos showing off cars, money, jewelry.
It really appeared as though Maurice's music career was going to take off, and Rashawn was very attracted to that exciting lifestyle.
As far as Rashawn was concerned, Maurice was someone with a bright future ahead of him.
She was crazy about him.
The couple were head over heels in love, and they were making plans to move in together.
But now, instead of moving in with the man she loved, Rashawn has been shot inside her mother's apartment and left clinging to life.
It was quickly determined that the victim had been shot in the head, point blank.
Initially, you can see with the contact wound to the head that it was not likely that she would survive.
Pulse is gone.
Unfortunately, with all their efforts to save her life, and it was too late. Rashawn Jackson is dead.
"34-year-old restaurant manager Rashawn Jackson had fallen head over heels for up-and-coming Atlanta rapper Maurice Nesbitt, a.k.a. Mega Ruckus.
She saw him as someone that she could really spend her life with and have a serious relationship with.
She loved his creativity and his passion for his music. It seemed like his career was getting ready to take off.
But now, Rashawn is lying in a pool of blood with a fatal gunshot wound.
Paramedics attempted to provide first aid, but the victim had been shot in the head, point blank.
Pulse is gone.
Unfortunately, with all their efforts to save her life, and it was too late. Rashawn Jackson is dead.
Officers give the devastating news to Rashawn's mother and sister.
Rashawn's mother was beside herself.
The family was just too distraught to even communicate with police officers at that time.
In an effort to get a more cohesive and coherent statement and give them time to calm down, they did have to take them down to the police precinct.
As Rashawn's family continues to process the tragedy, detectives arrive to begin processing the crime scene.
Her body was in between the bed and the closet.
It seems Rashawn was caught off guard by her killer. There's a pool of blood under Rashawn's head, as well as blood splatter leading into the direction of the closet.
Around the room, detectives locate more potential clues.
We see some cigarettes in the room. We see a couple of beer cans.
These items were collected and sent off to the crime lab in hopes that they would find DNA evidence.
Investigators also find ballistic evidence that they can try to tie back to the murder weapon.
The investigators find a 9mm shell casing, which is collected and sent off to ballistic analysis.
Outside of Rashawn's bedroom, the rest of the apartment appears to be undisturbed.
When investigators checked the entirety of the house, they found that there's no evidence of forced entry. The house had not been ransacked. There appeared that no items were missing.
It seems more like whoever killed Rashawn was either let into the apartment or had a key of their own.
This must have been someone Rashawn knew.
Hoping to get an idea of who that person might be, officers begin a canvass of the apartment complex.
Officers began door-to-door canvassing the neighborhood.
But while several neighbors heard the gunshot, none of them saw the person who fired the gun.
Without a visual description, homicide detectives had very little to go on.
Until they meet with the apartment complex's leasing manager.
Detectives discovered that there are cameras located on the property that could provide some surveillance video.
All right. Here's the parking lot just before 3 a.m.
He shows detectives the footage, and they can see a white car pulling up around 2:41 a.m.
The vehicle parks just a few yards away from the Jacksons' front door, and a shadowy figure exits.
You see him get out of his car, you can see him walk in the apartment.
For the next few minutes, there's no other activity on the video.
He stayed in there for probably 30 minutes to 45 minutes.
At that point, he can be seen exiting the apartment, entering his vehicle, and speeding away.
As they continue to watch the video, minutes later, they could see emergency vehicles arriving on the scene to attend to Rashawn.
Radio, we have a confirmation on suspect vehicles.
Detectives believe this is no coincidence.
Detectives are certain that this man has to be Rashawn's killer.
Police in Atlanta, Georgia are investigating the homicide of Rashawn Jackson after the 34-year-old restaurant manager was shot dead in the middle of the night.
In this once quiet neighborhood of Venetian Hills, the people are just fearful. If something like this could happen to Rashawn, what about the rest of them?
But detectives have a hunch this was a targeted attack. And now they've discovered surveillance video of Rashawn's suspected killer leaving the crime scene.
It definitely looked like he was in a hurry to get out of there.
While the video is compelling evidence, it's not a slam dunk for investigators.
It does not provide a clear view of the suspect's face, nor the tag number on the vehicle. The video surveillance is just too grainy to make out clear details.
Still, they radioed to police in the area with a description of the car.
The detectives issued an all-points bulletin to be on the lookout for that vehicle. The white sedan.
News of Rashawn's death soon spreads throughout the greater Atlanta area.
When I first heard of Rashawn's passing, I was on my way to work at that moment where we worked together. Once I found out I couldn't work the rest of the day, a few of us couldn't work the rest of the day. So it was, the hardest news.
Meanwhile, detectives head back to the station to speak with Rashawn's grieving mother and sister.
They started trying to figure out what happened. What did they hear? What did they see? Who could have done this to Rashawn?
Rashawn's loved ones are still overwhelmed by everything that's happened.
They are absolutely distraught, but they want to see justice served.
Detectives start the interview by asking the family members to slowly walk them through everything that happened that night.
I'm so sorry for your loss. We're gonna get to the bottom of this.
Can you please tell us everything you remember about what happened?
Yes, well, it was a normal evening.
Rashawn's family tells detectives that yesterday was just like another day. Nothing stuck out of the ordinary about Rashawn's activity or her behavior.
They were at her mother's home, and Rashawn had came home from work, and they were all just hanging out for a little while.
They all went to bed around 11 p.m.
LaToya says she distinctly remembers locking the front door before turning in for the night.
She told the police that she locked the door, and she went upstairs and she laid in the bed with her mom and fell asleep.
I'm a heavy sleeper, so I didn't hear the gunshot go off, but it woke Mama up.
That's right.
Around 3 a.m., Miss Jackson was awakened by a loud pop.
I tried to find the source of the noise.
It startles her, so she gets up out of her bed and moves towards the sound.
Miss Jackson says she walked into the living room and didn't see anything unusual. However, she did hear a car start outside.
She hears the sound of tires screeching.
At this point, she looks out the window and doesn't see the car. But she does notice the door is unlocked, and this gives her a sinking feeling in her stomach.
Rashawn? Rashawn!
Concerned, Rashawn's mother went to check on her.
She called out to Rashawn, and there was no answer.
When she opened the bedroom door, she saw Rashawn lying on the floor near her closet.
Rashawn?
She was unsure of what exactly was going on. But as she approached her daughter, she saw the blood.
Rashawn! Oh, my baby! LaToya!
Rashawn's sister runs in the room. She goes to assist her sister, and her sister's barely breathing.
What happened? I don't know!
Miss Jackson tells detectives that for a moment, Rashawn was still conscious and trying to say something.
Oh, come on, baby. Come on, baby. We're here.
She tries to, talk to her, say like, don't die, stay awake. And she says Rashawn is trying to speak to her.
She's trying to say something to her, but she can't get the words out. So at this point, Rashawn's sister grabs the phone to dial 911.
I need ambulance, please. My sister is sad.
Rashawn's mother says she held her daughter in her arms until first responders arrived.
She said she was trying to feel for her heartbeat, but by the time paramedics arrived, it was too late.
Her daughter basically died in her arms.
Did you hear anyone else inside of the home? Was Rashawn fighting with anyone?
Not at all.
There is no statements from her mother or sister that they heard any type of arguing or anything like that. All we knew was there was a gunshot.
It's a horrifying story, and investigators offer their condolences for the family's loss.
But they also have an important question they're hoping the family will be able to answer.
They were asking them who could have done this to her.
The two women immediately give the same answer.
There's only one person that they could think of.
They told him, basically, that the only person that could have done it was Maurice Nesbitt.
Police in Atlanta have just heard a harrowing account from Rashawn Jackson's mother about her daughter dying in her arms after suffering a fatal gunshot wound from an apparent intruder.
There was nothing more that she could do, and the pain and the devastation that she felt in that moment as the life left her daughter's body, she would never be the same again.
Based on evidence at the Jackson home, it seems that Rashawn Jackson opened the door for her killer, and her loved ones have a strong suspect.
They told him, basically, that the only person that could have done it was Maurice Nesbitt.
When Rashawn met Maurice in 2009, she was instantly infatuated with him. He possessed this larger-than-life rapper persona, and she was mesmerized by that.
He sold her a pipe dream that she could have it all with him, and she wanted to believe it.
It didn't take long, though, before Rashawn's family started to notice a change in her.
She changed when she was with him. She wasn't the same anymore.
Her mood turned dark, and she began not to be the bubbly person that they knew.
And I think that's when her family started to become suspicious of what was happening.
I never liked him.
Rashawn's mother definitely did not approve of Maurice. When Maurice came around, it was kind of a different energy that did not need to be in her house at that time.
Rashawn's mother says when she first heard Maurice rapping under his mega ruckus persona, she was shocked by how crude his lyrics were.
His songs were about violence, guns, and his lyrics were very demeaning towards women.
I expressed my concerns to Rashawn, but she just brushed it off.
When he talked to Rashawn about it, she said he only rapped about those things, and that's not who he was in real life.
But before long, the family noticed other telltale signs that something was horribly wrong.
They began to notice marks on Rashawn's body. And when they asked her about it, she would make excuses as though she fell or bumped into something.
And it was unlike her to lie to us, but we could tell that she was covering up for him.
They believed that Maurice had begun abusing her.
And according to the family, the abuse wasn't only physical.
He was taking her hard-earned money from her.
I'm gonna need another 1K for this video.
Maurice did not have a steady income. He would definitely come to Rashawn for money if he needed it, whether it be for music or whenever he asked for it. Rayshawn was being used.
Baby, are you sure? I mean, we've already spent a lot.
I know, baby, but I promise when this video pop off, it's gonna make a difference for the both of us.
He made promises to Rashawn. You know, he promised her that they would move in together, that they would be a family, and she took those to heart. And she would actually give him some of her checks in an effort to show him how much she loved him.
Thank you, baby. This new video gonna be fire.
Well, you know I'm your biggest fan.
I only heard maybe 1 or 2 songs. They were not hit makers to me.
I think he was making his life or trying to appear more grandiose than it actually was. No one was really buying what he was selling, so his career didn't take off.
We tried to convince Rashawn that she deserved better and that she needed to dump him.
They started to tell her, like, hey, maybe he's not this great guy that you think he is, and you should probably separate from him.
Eventually, she started to listen to us.
After time, Rashawn began to understand that the abuse was occurring, and she decided that she would not continue it.
Finally, in May 2014, after almost 6 years of dating, Rashawn worked up the courage to break up with Maurice.
She told Maurice that she was tired of being used and abused by him.
But she was still afraid of him. That's why she moved in with me.
To escape his reach and access, she moved back in with her mother.
He was still trying to harass her on the phone.
She didn't have no contact at all, but it was ways Maurice found her. That was what she would say, he would find me.
They had been apart for probably about 2 weeks, 3 weeks, when, you know, he didn't stop calling, didn't stop trying to text her, but she was separating herself from him, just going to work and just trying to get things back to normal.
I think that's why he came to the house last night, to confront her in person.
Based on what they're hearing, detectives agree that Maurice is a probable suspect. They just have one more question for Rashawn's loved ones.
Do you know what kind of car Maurice drives?
Yes, a white sedan.
The suspect from their surveillance footage was also driving a white sedan.
That's him. That's definitely him.
Armed with the family statement, detectives begin their work to bring Maurice to justice.
They have information that Maurice Nesbitt drives his white car, but that isn't sufficient, you know, for them to get an arrest warrant because nobody saw him shoot her. They needed more evidence, so they started doing a background search of Maurice Nesbitt.
When they run the background check, investigators discover that Maurice has a long criminal history.
They discovered that Maurice Nesbitt was a convicted felon. He did have a prior history for drugs, for guns, and also for domestic violence.
Some of the police reports were filed by Rashawn herself.
In one incident report from 2009, Rashawn reports that Maurice punched her in the face and kicked her in the mouth.
Maurice threatened to kill not only her, but her whole family if she didn't do what he wanted her to do.
Rashawn told police that Maurice was terrorizing her. It's clear to the detectives that this was an abusive relationship that was spiraling out of control.
And when investigators pull Maurice's DMV records, they confirm what Rashawn's loved ones told them. Maurice owns a white sedan, like the one seen in the surveillance video.
The car description from the DMV records matched the car that was on the crime scene the night of Rashawn's murder.
But the DMV records aren't the only proof the car belongs to Maurice.
They ended up finding one of his rap videos on YouTube. In the video, while he's rapping and stuff, he has this white car in the background.
For the police, this is a clear sign that they're on to the right track.
Detectives needed to speak with Maurice Nesbitt immediately.
Atlanta homicide investigators believe Maurice Nesbitt is responsible for the shooting death of his ex-girlfriend, 34-year-old Rashawn Jackson.
His car was spotted on surveillance at the apartment complex when Rashawn was killed, and he had been abusive to her in the past.
The detective's next move is try to have a sit-down interview and question Maurice, but when they reach out to him, he does not answer the phone.
So at this point, they issue a bolo for Maurice and a warrant for his arrest.
While patrol officers are on the hunt, investigators continue to build their case.
The DA's office gets involved at that point, and we start issuing subpoenas for phone records to see if, in addition to the car being in a surveillance video, we could link him there with his cell phone.
As they look through the log of calls and texts, what they see lines up with what they heard from Rashawn's family. Maurice refused to accept her rejection.
In the couple's messages, Rashawn is clearly pushing Maurice away, but he refuses to take no as an answer.
Whenever she tries to turn him away, he resorts to threats and insults.
There were several text messages where he would text her back to back to back. Why don't you answer your phone? Why don't you answer your phone? Where are you?
Less than 2 weeks before the murder, Maurice even sent an overt threat.
Maurice sends a message that every dog has its day, and yours is coming up.
To investigators, this was a clear indication that he was plotting some type of revenge for Rashawn cutting him out of her life.
With every piece of evidence they came across, the police were convinced more and more that Maurice was responsible for this crime.
Their suspicions were heightened when they realized that Maurice was clearly laying low to avoid law enforcement.
Weeks go by without any sign of the wanted man.
There was no doubt in my mind. I knew it was Maurice. At that time, we was wondering, where is Maurice? How did he just do this and leave?
He was doing everything in his power to avoid coming in contact with law enforcement.
Then, on July 23rd, 2014, investigators finally receive a solid lead on their fugitive.
Homicide.
Nearly 2 months after Rashawn was killed, police received a tip that Maurice was seen in Jonesboro, Georgia. Jonesboro is a very small community just south of Atlanta.
Police swiftly respond to the address provided by the tipster and take Maurice into custody. In an interrogation room, they hope he'll come clean, but those hopes are instantly dashed.
When the interrogation starts, Maurice immediately asks for a lawyer.
Give me my lawyer, man.
He declines to answer any questions.
But despite Maurice's unwillingness to give a statement, he has no choice but to give police a sample of his DNA.
They already had a warrant for the DNA, so he couldn't get out of that one. If his DNA is found on the items collected from Rashawn's bedroom, they can place him at the scene of the crime.
Even without a confession, the investigators feel confident in the evidence they've gathered. They charge Maurice with felony murder and book him in the Fulton County Jail.
When Rashawn's family gets the information that Maurice has been arrested, they are relieved that he is finally behind bars.
Knowing that Maurice was finally arrested and actually facing a jury, that brought a big relief.
But that relief is short-lived.
Prosecutors really wanted to have those DNA results before the trial, but it was taking a while.
In Georgia, you have 90 days to indict someone after they've been in custody, or either they're entitled to bond at that point. So once the 90 days came, I believe his attorney filed a motion for a bond reduction hearing, and they presented some information that his health may be at risk, that he had cancer.
I've never heard of Rashawn saying that he had cancer or being sick at all.
The judge, I'm not sure if they actually verified it or not, but he was granted a bond to deal with the issues surrounding his cancer.
His bond is set at $150,000, and he's actually able to make the bond. He was allowed to be released on an ankle monitor.
For Rashawn's family, this was infuriating and insulting that the potential killer could just walk out of the courtroom, a free man, essentially.
When I first learned Maurice was out on bond, I felt like there was almost no justice there.
But when the DNA results from the crime scene come back, prosecutors finally feel ready to try the case.
When the test results come back, they are a positive match for the saliva found on the cigarette butts and the beer cans.
It places him in a room, which is really, really strong evidence.
Maurice Nesbitt's murder trial begins on September 25, 2017. In their opening statement, prosecutors argue that the couple's relationship reached a tipping point when Rashawn finally decided to leave.
She was getting fed up with it, and she had made up her mind and she wasn't gonna go back. And I guess that's when he decided that if he couldn't have her, then no one else could have her.
Once he felt that his control was being lost and she was finally breaking free, he couldn't handle that.
In the early morning hours of May 27th, Maurice was begging Rashawn to let him see her.
Around 3 o'clock in the morning, Maurice shows up to the apartment.
Records show Maurice had been spamming Rashawn's phone with calls.
So Rashawn was probably expecting him.
Yeah, look, can I talk to you in person? I just need 5 minutes of your time, and that's it.
He asked to just talk and hang out for a few minutes. Rashawn lets him in.
Victims let their abusers back into their lives for numerous reasons. Emotional attachment, hoping for change, or fear of retaliation. The cycle of abuse can make leaving these type of relationships permanently a difficult challenge.
Prosecutors argue Maurice convinced Rashawn to let him come up to her room.
And this feel like old times. I really been missing you.
I know. Maurice knows. I told you it's not like that between me and you anymore.
Instead of parting amicably, Maurice decided that he was going to put his plan in action and end her life.
Okay, if that's what you want.
Because there was no struggle at the scene of the crime, prosecutors believe that Rashawn never saw what was coming. She was totally taken by surprise.
While the woman he claimed to love for 6 years lay on the floor bleeding out, Maurice flees the scene and goes into hiding.
The prosecutors laid an insurmountable amount of evidence.
Maurice could tell things were not going in his favor.
By the 5th day of trial, prosecutors are feeling confident they'll have a win.
I was pleased with the evidence that I had put up, and we were about to do closings and get that conviction for her.
But Maurice has other plans.
What do you mean he's gone? And on this morning, Maurice was not there.
Maurice had gone on the run.
Atlanta prosecutors are 5 days into the trial of aspiring rapper Maurice Nesbitt for the murder of his girlfriend of 6 years, Rashawn Jackson.
But now on the last day of the trial, Maurice has failed to show up to court. And by all indications, he's gone on the run.
It's getting closer and closer to time when court is supposed to start, and there's still no Maurice Nesbitt. What do you mean he's gone?
They quickly tracked down Maurice's ankle monitor, and they were able to determine it was cut off 6 hours earlier.
Based on the information from his ankle monitor, Maurice was last seen heading south from Atlanta on Interstate 75.
By now, investigators know he could be hundreds of miles away.
Atlanta police now issue a BOLO, and surrounding agencies are notified.
He's considered armed and dangerous.
Back at the courthouse, prosecutors present a plan to proceed with the trial in Maurice's absence.
The state argued that it would be unfair to Rashawn and her family to have to do this again.
The judge agrees, and Maurice's trial continues without him.
The judge decided that we would do the closing arguments with him not being present and let the jury deliberate without him being present, which was great for the state. We can argue now, he did it, that's why he's gone, that's why he ran.
The jury agrees.
They find Maurice guilty of felony murder, aggravated assault, and possession of a firearm during the commission of a felony.
He is sentenced to life in prison, plus an additional 5 years for the weapons charges.
But investigators still have to find him.
Maurice not being there for his sentencing was kind of crazy. It was very sad knowing that he wasn't there for his sentencing.
He moved underground, he was just moving around so that he couldn't be seen.
Weeks go by with no sign of the wanted fugitive and no leads on his whereabouts.
Since his mother's from Mexico, they think he could have fled the country.
The Mexican authorities got involved and they did everything in their power to track him down. Unfortunately, there were never any solid leads.
Weeks turn into months, and months turn into years with no sign of Maurice.
3.5 long years go by without any new developments. But that changes on April 12, 2021, when the case receives renewed national attention.
The story is featured on In Pursuit with John Walsh in America's Most Wanted.
The tactic pays off.
Someone watching the show recognized him as their roommate and called the police to have him arrested.
The anonymous tipster says that Maurice is living under an assumed identity in Birmingham, Alabama.
They actually give the police the exact address where Maurice is hiding out.
On April 19th, police finally arrest Maurice Nesbitt again. And this time, they aren't letting him go.
Maurice is extradited back to Georgia, where he finally begins to serve the prison sentence the jury handed to him.
The same judge that tried the case sentenced him formally to the life plus 5 years, and he's been in custody ever since.
That brings great big relief. I'm pretty sure in the family's life, and mine, and everybody that was close to her, it brought big relief. It was definitely closure for a lot of people.
For any woman that is in a situation like Rashawn was in, there are resources to help you get out of that situation before he ends up harming you too bad or taking your life. And I mean, if the writings are on the wall, listen to your instincts and just go.
With Rashawn not being here, the world, I would say, has lost a very bright, outgoing, funny, caring, loving person.
Abuse is never okay. If you or someone you love is in an abusive relationship, there is help available. Call the Domestic Violence Hotline at 1-800-799-SAFE.
The lights along Bethesda Row were never meant to become silent witnesses to one of the most disturbing crimes in modern American retail history. On an ordinary Friday night in March 2011, the sidewalks still carried the warmth of people finishing dinner. Couples wandered past glowing storefront windows, and employees locked doors believing another workweek had come to an uneventful end. Nothing about that evening suggested that before sunrise, one young woman would lose her life after a desperate fight that stretched across an entire store, while another would carefully transform herself from killer into what appeared to be the only surviving victim. Some crimes arrive like a sudden explosion. Others unfold quietly, hidden beneath ordinary routines that no one thinks twice about. This story belongs to the second kind. It begins with familiar faces, a workplace built around positivity, expensive athletic clothing folded into perfect stacks, friendly greetings exchanged between co-workers, and the comforting illusion that danger belongs somewhere else. There were no dark alleys, abandoned warehouses, or notorious neighborhoods. There was only a bright retail store in one of Maryland's most affluent communities, where customers came searching for yoga pants, running gear, and the promise of healthier lives. That contrast is what continues to haunt investigators, journalists, and everyone who has studied the case. Violence on this scale was never expected inside a place designed to represent wellness and balance. Yet beneath carefully arranged displays and polished hardwood floors, something was slowly building. A conflict that may have seemed insignificant from the outside would eventually erupt into unimaginable brutality, leaving behind a crime scene so shocking that even experienced detectives struggled to comprehend what they were seeing. The victim was 30-year-old Jana Troxell Murray, a woman whose life reflected discipline, kindness, and responsibility. Friends remembered someone who cared deeply about the people around her. Co-workers described a manager who believed that leadership meant setting an example instead of demanding obedience. She worked hard, expected honesty, and treated the store as more than just a place to earn a paycheck. It was a community she wanted to protect. The woman who would later stand accused of killing her was 28-year-old Brittany Norwood, another employee at the same store. To outsiders, they were simply co-workers sharing shifts, helping customers, and closing the shop together after long days. Nothing about their public interactions hinted that one of them would soon become responsible for one of the most violent workplace murders Maryland had ever witnessed. When investigators eventually reconstructed the timeline, they discovered that almost every critical moment had appeared perfectly ordinary while it was happening. That is perhaps the most unsettling aspect of this case. Evil rarely announces itself. It often hides behind routine phone calls, familiar voices, and simple requests that seem too harmless to question. Imagine standing outside the store shortly after closing time. The shopping district is beginning to quiet down. Employees from neighboring businesses are locking doors, counting cash drawers, and preparing to go home. Streetlights reflect softly against clean sidewalks. Cars pass without slowing. Somewhere nearby, restaurants are still serving late diners. Life continues exactly as it should. Inside the Lululemon store, the final tasks of the evening have already been completed. Clothing has been folded with meticulous precision. Inventory sits neatly organized. The cash registers have been balanced. The alarm system is ready to be activated. Another business day appears complete. For most people, closing a store is little more than habit. Lock the doors. Turn off the lights. Go home. Repeat tomorrow. But routines can create opportunities. One phone call would soon interrupt the end of that ordinary evening. It sounded like the kind of request that co-workers make every day. Someone had forgotten something inside the building. A wallet. A transit pass. An item impossible to retrieve without returning to the locked store. It was inconvenient but believable. The kind of favor most people would grant without hesitation. Compassion can sometimes become vulnerability. Jana agreed to return. There was no reason not to. She had no way of knowing that walking back through those familiar doors would become the final decision of her life. Long before police officers sealed off the building with yellow tape, before television news helicopters circled overhead, before forensic specialists documented every stain and every footprint, another story was already unfolding behind the locked entrance. It was a story that would challenge investigators not only because of its violence, but because of the elaborate deception that followed. Some murderers flee. Some confess. Others try to erase every trace of what they have done. But only a few attempt something far more dangerous. They create an entirely new reality. Whoever was responsible for what happened inside that store did not simply leave. Instead, the killer remained surrounded by the aftermath, carefully shaping a narrative designed to mislead police from the very first moment they arrived. Every minute spent inside the building after the violence ended became another opportunity to construct an illusion. When emergency responders finally entered the store the following morning, nothing seemed straightforward. One woman was dead. Another was alive. The survivor appeared battered, restrained, and traumatized. The scene suggested a horrifying attack carried out by unknown intruders. At first glance, it looked like a robbery gone catastrophically wrong, perhaps involving multiple offenders, whose brutality exceeded almost anything local investigators had encountered in years. But crime scenes speak in thousands of tiny details. Blood dries according to time. Footprints reveal direction. Fibers cling to clothing. Wounds tell stories that words cannot. Every object left behind becomes part of a conversation between the victim and the investigators, who arrived too late to save them. The truth rarely disappears completely. It simply waits for someone patient enough to uncover it. As detectives began documenting the interior of the store, they encountered destruction unlike anything expected inside a boutique fitness retailer. Merchandise had been scattered. Furniture displaced. Signs of struggle stretched across multiple sections of the building. The violence had not been confined to a single location. It had moved, room by room, as though one person had fought desperately to survive while another refused to stop. The physical evidence painted a terrifying picture even before the medical examiner completed the autopsy. This had not been an instantaneous killing. It had been a prolonged battle. Every indication suggested determination on both sides. One woman fighting to stay alive. Another determined that she would not. The scale of the injuries would later shock courtroom spectators, veteran detectives, and forensic experts alike. Numbers alone could never capture the suffering endured during those final moments. They represented not only physical violence, but persistence, rage, and an almost unimaginable refusal to stop. Yet despite all of that horror, the greatest obstacle facing investigators was not understanding how the victim died. It was determining who was telling the truth. The surviving employee described masked attackers. She spoke of terror, assault, and helplessness. Her injuries appeared to support her account. She looked exactly like someone who had barely escaped death. For a brief period, the investigation moved in the direction she had carefully prepared. Police searched for strangers. Communities feared violent criminals still at large. Residents wondered whether random attacks had reached even the safest shopping districts. But investigations are rarely solved by dramatic revelations. More often, they advance because one inconsistency refuses to fit. A stain appears where it should not. A footprint ends instead of continuing. An injury tells a different story than the words meant to explain it. Little by little, certainty begins to fracture. In this case, those fractures would eventually expose a deception so carefully constructed that its collapse became almost as compelling as the murder itself. The question would no longer be who entered the store that night. The question would become why someone who appeared to be a victim had worked so hard to convince the world she was not the one responsible. Behind every celebrated true crime case lies a painful truth that must never be forgotten. Beneath the headlines, courtroom testimony, forensic diagrams, and television documentaries stood a real woman whose future ended on a polished retail floor where she had expected nothing more dangerous than another closing shift. Jana Murray never knew that a simple act of kindness would place her inside a nightmare from which she would never return. This is the story of trust betrayed, of violence hidden beneath ordinary smiles, of a crime scene designed to deceive, and of investigators, who refused to accept the first story they were told. It is a journey through one of the most disturbing workplace murders in recent American history, where every answer uncovered an even darker question, and where the smallest details ultimately revealed a truth that no carefully crafted lie could hide forever. March arrives quietly in Bethesda, Maryland. Winter has not completely surrendered, but spring has already begun, leaving subtle traces across the town. The air carries a lingering chill in the early mornings, while the afternoons offer brief moments of warmth that tempt people to leave their coats unbuttoned. Bare tree branches stand waiting for new leaves. Cafes pull tables closer to their windows, and professionals hurry through sidewalks carrying coffee cups as another workday begins. Bethesda is not the kind of place most Americans associate with violent crime. Just northwest of Washington, D.C., it has long been known as an affluent community where tree-lined streets, luxury apartments, upscale boutiques, and carefully maintained public spaces create an atmosphere of comfort and stability. Families gather in neighborhood parks, commuters board trains toward the nation's capital, and shoppers spend weekends browsing stores that promise everything from designer clothing to handcrafted gifts. The downtown district, particularly Bethesda Row, had become one of the area's busiest commercial centers. It was a destination rather than simply a shopping street. Restaurants served business lunches during the day and intimate dinners after sunset. Independent bookstores stood beside nationally recognized brands. Sidewalk musicians occasionally performed near outdoor seating while visitors wandered between storefronts, without any sense of urgency. Among those businesses stood a Lululemon Athletica store. By 2011, Lululemon had become far more than a clothing company. It represented a lifestyle built around health, optimism, personal growth, and community. Brightly colored athletic apparel filled carefully organized shelves. Inspirational messages decorated walls. Employees were encouraged to know customers by name, discuss fitness goals, recommend yoga studios, and create an environment where shopping felt less like a transaction and more like joining a supportive community. Every detail inside the store reflected that philosophy. The lighting was warm rather than harsh. Music played softly through hidden speakers. Displays were arranged with meticulous precision. Every stack of leggings, every folded jacket, every neatly aligned accessory contributed to the impression that this was a place where balance mattered. To customers, it felt welcoming. To employees, it carried expectations that extended beyond sales numbers. Lululemon invested heavily in its culture. Staff members were expected to embody positivity, confidence, discipline, and authenticity. Team meetings often focused on personal development as much as business performance. Employees discussed goals, fitness routines, and professional ambitions. Success was measured not only through revenue, but through attitude and teamwork. From the outside, it appeared almost ideal. But every workplace, regardless of its image, is still populated by ordinary human beings. Ambition creates competition. Responsibility creates pressure. Small disagreements quietly accumulate beneath polite conversations. People smile even when resentment is growing. The Bethesda store was no exception. Behind the polished appearance of the showroom existed schedules to coordinate, inventory to manage, difficult customers to satisfy, and company policies that employees were expected to follow. Managers carried the responsibility of enforcing those rules fairly, even when doing so strained personal relationships. Retail work often appears simple to outsiders. Customers see only a few minutes of interaction. They rarely witness the countless tasks completed before opening or after closing. Boxes arrive filled with merchandise that must be counted and organized. Displays are constantly adjusted. Sales figures are reviewed. Loss prevention procedures become part of daily routine. Employees trust one another, because they often work alone together after business hours. That trust is essential. Without it, the entire operation becomes vulnerable. Closing shifts create a unique environment. As customers leave one by one, conversations become more relaxed. Music echoes more clearly through the nearly empty store. Cash registers are balanced. Fitting rooms are inspected. Mirrors are cleaned. Security alarms are prepared. Doors are locked only after every responsibility has been completed. For many employees, those final minutes become the calmest part of the day. They laugh about difficult customers. Discuss weekend plans. Talk about family. Share frustrations that would never be voiced while shoppers are present. It is during these ordinary moments that co-workers develop familiarity. They begin to understand each other's habits. Who always arrives early? Who forgets their keys? Who volunteers for extra shifts? Who can be trusted? Those routines become so familiar that unusual behavior often goes unnoticed until it is too late. Jana Murray had earned the confidence of those around her. At 30 years old, she had developed a reputation for professionalism that extended well beyond basic management duties. She believed that consistency mattered. Friends and colleagues described someone who approached problems calmly rather than emotionally. She listened before making decisions and tried to create an atmosphere where employees felt respected. Leadership in retail rarely receives much recognition. Managers solve problems customers never notice. They calm disagreements. Cover unexpected absences. Answer complaints. Handle inventory discrepancies. Complete paperwork long after everyone else has gone home. Jana accepted those responsibilities without seeking attention. People who knew her remembered warmth rather than authority. She cared about details, because details protected the business and the people working inside it. Her responsibilities included safeguarding company property, documenting irregularities, and reporting issues that affected the store. These were not optional duties. They were fundamental expectations of her position. That sense of responsibility would eventually place her in direct conflict with someone she worked beside. Brittany Norwood appeared to fit naturally into the Lululemon environment. She was athletic, energetic, and familiar with the company's culture. Customers saw another friendly employee helping them select workout clothing. Few could have imagined the internal tensions that investigators would later examine so closely. Co-workers often know only fragments of each other's lives. They recognize smiles, work habits, favorite coffee orders, vacation plans. But private pressures remain hidden. Financial stress, personal disappointments, fear of failure, embarrassment, resentment. These emotions rarely appear during ordinary conversations. Instead, they accumulate quietly beneath the surface. According to prosecutors, trouble had already begun before the night of the murder. Store merchandise had reportedly gone missing. Questions emerged regarding possible theft involving an employee. Internal concerns required management attention. Loss prevention procedures exist, because retail theft can come from both customers and staff. Every missing item affects inventory records. Companies investigate discrepancies carefully, because patterns often reveal larger problems. Evidence presented during the investigation suggested that Brittany Norwood had been confronted over allegations involving stolen merchandise. Whether the confrontation itself was emotional or restrained remains uncertain. What investigators concluded, however, was that Jana's professional responsibilities placed her in a position where she could not simply ignore what she knew. Imagine the emotional weight of such a situation. Two co-workers who had shared ordinary shifts. Folded clothing together. Helped customers together. Locked doors together. Now separated by a growing conflict that could threaten one person's employment and another person's obligation to enforce company policy. Neither woman likely imagined where that conflict would end. The store itself remained unchanged. Customers continued entering each morning. Music continued playing. Displays remained perfectly arranged. Life moved forward without revealing that relationships inside the workplace had begun to fracture. The final week before the murder appeared outwardly normal. Employees arrived for scheduled shifts. Deliveries were processed. Sales goals were discussed. Nothing publicly suggested that one of the most violent workplace homicides in recent Maryland history was only days away. That is often how tragedy approaches. Not with obvious warning signs visible to everyone, but through small decisions. Private conversations. Hidden fears. Moments that seem insignificant until viewed in hindsight. Friday, March 11, 2011, began like countless Fridays before it. Morning sunlight reflected from office buildings as commuters filled the streets. Lunch crowds gathered at nearby restaurants. Afternoon shoppers drifted between boutiques carrying colorful bags. The Lululemon store welcomed customers interested in weekend fitness classes, new running gear, or simply browsing the latest collection. Employees greeted visitors with practiced enthusiasm. Fitting rooms opened and closed throughout the day. Credit card receipts printed steadily. Nothing appeared unusual. As evening approached, activity gradually slowed. Restaurants prepared for dinner service. Office workers disappeared into parking garages and metro stations. Streetlights flickered to life as darkness settled across Bethesda Row. Inside the store, employees began the familiar rhythm of closing procedures. Garments were folded one final time. Shelves were straightened. Inventory was checked. Cash drawers balanced. Security routines followed almost automatically after years of repetition. Every completed task brought the workday closer to its end. Outside, passing pedestrians had no reason to pay attention to the brightly lit athletic clothing store. To them, it was simply another business preparing to close. To the employees inside, it was another ordinary Friday. Or at least it appeared that way. When the doors were finally locked, there was every reason to believe the day had ended peacefully. The alarm system would soon be activated. Employees would head home. Saturday customers would arrive the following morning. Nothing seemed out of place. Yet beneath that appearance of routine, invisible tensions had not disappeared. Professional responsibility had collided with personal desperation. Trust had quietly become vulnerability. The carefully maintained culture of optimism inside the store had begun to conceal emotions far darker than anyone realized. Before dawn, those polished wooden floors would become the setting for an unimaginable struggle. The inspirational slogans decorating the walls would stand in silent contrast to extraordinary violence. And the same store that had spent years encouraging people to pursue healthier, happier lives would instead become the center of an investigation that would leave even seasoned detectives struggling to understand how such unimaginable brutality could emerge from such an ordinary place. The stage had already been set. The people were already in position. All that remained was a single phone call, one simple request that sounded so ordinary no reasonable person would have questioned it. Within minutes, an act of kindness would open a locked door. And once that door closed again, everything would change forever. Long before her name appeared in newspaper headlines or court documents, Jana Troxell Murray was simply someone who believed that ordinary things mattered. She believed people deserved to be treated with respect, that work should be done well even when no one was watching, and that small acts of kindness could shape the atmosphere of an entire day. Those who knew her would later struggle with the painful contrast between the woman they remembered and the horrifying way her life ended. For them, Jana was never just another victim in a true crime story. She was a daughter, a friend, a trusted manager, and a woman whose future had been quietly unfolding until it was taken away in a single night. Born into a close-knit family, Jana grew up learning the values of responsibility and perseverance. She was not someone who demanded attention or sought recognition. Instead, she earned respect gradually, through consistency. The people closest to her often remembered her smile before anything else. It was the kind of smile that appeared naturally rather than out of obligation, the kind that made customers feel welcome and co-workers feel comfortable asking for help. As she entered adulthood, those qualities only became more apparent. Friends described someone who enjoyed simple pleasures far more than dramatic adventures. She appreciated conversations over coffee, afternoons spent with loved ones, and the satisfaction that came from accomplishing everyday goals. She was organized without becoming rigid, confident without appearing arrogant, and compassionate without expecting anything in return. Like many young professionals, Jana worked hard to build a life that reflected her values. She understood that success was rarely achieved through shortcuts. It came from showing up every day, accepting responsibility, and treating people fairly. Those principles shaped not only her personal relationships, but also her professional career. Working at Lululemon was more than selling athletic clothing. The company's culture encouraged employees to become ambassadors for wellness, motivation, and personal growth. Jana embraced that philosophy sincerely. She believed that leadership was measured not by authority, but by example. When new employees joined the team, she wanted them to feel supported rather than intimidated. She offered guidance patiently, answered questions without irritation, and understood that confidence often grows through encouragement instead of criticism. Customers rarely noticed these moments. They saw a friendly manager greeting them at the entrance, recommending products, or helping locate the correct size. What they did not see were the countless small decisions she made behind the scenes. She stayed late to finish paperwork. She covered shifts when someone became ill. She resolved scheduling conflicts. She listened when employees struggled with personal challenges. Retail management often requires emotional labor that remains invisible. A successful manager must balance company expectations with genuine concern for the people working under them. Jana appeared remarkably capable of doing both. Her co-workers generally trusted her judgment, because she earned that trust rather than demanding it. If she corrected someone's mistake, it was done professionally. If she praised good work, it was sincere. She believed accountability and kindness could exist together. Outside the workplace, Jana maintained strong relationships with family and friends. Those closest to her remembered someone who rarely allowed work stress to define her personality. She enjoyed staying active, appreciated the outdoors, and valued experiences over possessions. Conversations with her often revolved around future plans rather than past disappointments. She was only 30 years old. An age where many people begin imagining the next chapter of their lives. Careers continue developing. Friendships deepen. Families expand. Dreams slowly transform into reality. The future still feels wide open. No one who spent time with Jana imagined that future would end on a Friday night inside the very store she helped manage. There is a painful irony in the trust required by retail work. Employees spend countless hours together inside enclosed spaces. They depend upon one another to complete tasks efficiently and safely. They exchange personal stories during quiet moments between customers. They celebrate birthdays, cover each other's shifts, and lock the doors together at night. Trust becomes routine. Routine becomes automatic. That trust extended to Brittany Norwood. To outside observers, the two women appeared to share an ordinary professional relationship. They worked in the same store, followed the same company procedures, and represented the same brand. Customers would have seen nothing unusual. Any disagreements remained private, hidden behind polite interactions expected in every workplace. Yet beneath that professional surface, tension had begun to develop. According to prosecutors, store management had become aware of suspected theft involving company merchandise. Such situations are deeply uncomfortable for everyone involved. Companies rely on managers to investigate inventory discrepancies objectively. Friendships cannot interfere with policy. Personal feelings cannot replace responsibility. For Jana, this was not simply a matter of choosing sides. It was part of her job. She had accepted the responsibility of protecting the business entrusted to her. Ignoring possible misconduct would have violated both company expectations and her own sense of integrity. People sometimes imagine moral decisions as dramatic moments accompanied by certainty. Real life is rarely that simple. Most ethical choices appear ordinary at first. A report must be completed. A supervisor informed. A conversation documented. Each decision seems small until consequences begin unfolding. If prosecutors were correct, Jana unknowingly became the greatest obstacle standing between Brittany Norwood and the life she wished to preserve. Whether Norwood feared losing her job, damaging her reputation, or facing humiliation, investigators believed those fears gradually evolved into something far more dangerous. Jana, meanwhile, continued living her life as she always had. She arrived for work, managed schedules, helped customers, completed reports, called family members, made plans for the future. Nothing suggests she sensed imminent danger. That is perhaps the cruelest element of this case. The victim entered her final day believing she was surrounded by familiarity. She knew the building. She knew the closing procedures. She knew the co-worker standing beside her. Everything felt predictable. When Friday, March 11th, finally arrived, there was nothing extraordinary about the beginning of Jana's day. Like millions of Americans finishing another work week, she prepared for an evening shift that would eventually transition into closing responsibilities. Customers flowed steadily through the store. Questions were answered. Purchases completed. Returns processed. Smiles exchanged. Hours passed according to routine. No customer walking through those doors would later remember witnessing obvious conflict between employees. There were no public arguments, no scenes dramatic enough to attract attention, no visible warning signs suggesting unimaginable violence waited only a few hours ahead. Sometimes the most devastating tragedies occur precisely because they remain invisible until the very last moment. As evening approached, Bethesda Row remained lively. Restaurants filled with weekend diners. Storefront windows glowed beneath the fading daylight. Couples laughed while carrying shopping bags between boutiques. Office workers hurried toward parking garages, eager to begin their weekends. Inside Lululemon, Jana focused on finishing another successful business day. Closing procedures demanded concentration. Registers needed balancing. Displays required straightening. Inventory had to remain accurate. Security measures could not be overlooked. Responsibility did not disappear simply because the workday was ending. For managers, closing often became the busiest period of the shift. Every completed task represented another promise that tomorrow's employees would arrive to a store prepared for business. As the final customers left, the atmosphere changed. Conversation replaced customer service. The music sounded louder inside the increasingly empty space. Bright displays reflected softly across polished wooden floors. The pace slowed. Employees gathered personal belongings while completing remaining responsibilities. There was comfort in that routine. After all, they had done it many times before. Jaina had every reason to believe this evening would end exactly like countless others. Lock the doors. Activate the alarm. Go home. Return tomorrow. Life often divides itself into moments we recognize only after they have passed. A last conversation, without realizing it, is the last. A final smile unnoticed at the time. One ordinary decision separating the future that might have existed from the one that never will. At approximately 9:30 that evening, the store officially closed. The workday appeared complete. Employees prepared to leave. The doors were secured. For a brief period, everything seemed perfectly normal. Jaina stepped away believing another successful shift had ended. She could not have imagined that only minutes later, her phone would ring. The request waiting on the other end sounded harmless. A forgotten belonging. A simple mistake. A co-worker needing help. How many times had similar situations happened before? People forget wallets, keys, transit cards, cell phones. Returning to retrieve them is hardly unusual. Helping a colleague is what decent people do. That willingness to help reflected exactly the kind of person Jaina had always been. Responsible. Dependable. Kind. She chose compassion over inconvenience. Without hesitation, she agreed to return. There was no reason to fear the familiar parking lot. No reason to distrust the voice asking for assistance. No reason to believe the locked store had become something entirely different during the few minutes she had been away. Every step she took back toward the entrance carried quiet confidence born from routine. She reached the door she had locked only moments earlier. The alarm system recorded its deactivation. The entrance opened once again. She walked inside. The door closed behind her. From that moment forward, no customer would ever see Jaina Murray alive again. Inside those walls, beneath bright retail lighting and surrounded by neatly folded athletic clothing, an ordinary act of kindness was about to become the first step into a prolonged struggle for survival. The woman who had spent years protecting the people and the business entrusted to her was about to discover that the greatest danger waiting that night did not come from a stranger hiding in the darkness. It came from someone she believed she already knew. The security system recorded the moment with complete indifference. A keypad was entered. The alarm was disarmed. The front door opened. For the electronic log, it was nothing more than another routine entry, one identical to countless others stored in memory. There was no warning, no indication that history had quietly shifted. Machines do not recognize fear. They record time, not intention. It was shortly after 10 p.m. when Jaina Murray stepped back inside the Lululemon store. Only minutes earlier, she had believed her workday was over. Now she was returning, because a co-worker needed help retrieving an item that had supposedly been left behind. The request sounded ordinary. The setting was familiar. The person waiting inside was someone she had worked beside before. Nothing about those first moments suggested that she had unknowingly walked into a carefully prepared trap. The store looked exactly as it had when she locked it. Display tables remained perfectly arranged. Rows of colorful athletic clothing stood neatly folded. Mirrors reflected the bright overhead lights. The polished hardwood floor gleamed beneath them. Outside, Bethesda Row continued settling into another peaceful Friday night. Traffic moved through nearby intersections. Diners lingered over late meals. Pedestrians walked past storefronts, without giving the quiet athletic apparel shop a second glance. Inside, only 2 people remained. No customers. No witnesses. No one expecting that within minutes, those carefully arranged displays would become part of one of the bloodiest workplace crime scenes in Maryland history. Investigators would later spend months reconstructing what happened next. No surveillance camera captured the violence. No recording preserved every movement. Instead, detectives relied on forensic evidence, bloodstain analysis, damaged merchandise, witness testimony, and the countless silent clues left scattered throughout the store. Those clues revealed something horrifying. This was not an attack that ended in seconds. It became a prolonged fight for survival. Prosecutors believed the confrontation began after Jana re-entered the building. Exactly what words were exchanged during those first moments remains unknown. Perhaps there was an argument. Perhaps Jana confronted Brittany about the suspected theft investigation. Perhaps Brittany realized the consequences she feared were becoming unavoidable. The truth disappeared with the only person who could have described it honestly. What investigators do know is that whatever happened next escalated with astonishing speed. The first blow shattered the illusion of safety. For Jana, the realization must have come almost instantly. The person standing before her was no longer simply a co-worker. She was fighting for her life. Evidence later showed that the struggle did not remain confined to a single location. Blood appeared in multiple sections of the store. Furniture had been displaced. Merchandise lay scattered across the floor. Objects had been knocked from shelves. The violence moved through the building like a storm, suggesting that Jana refused to surrender. She fought. Again. And again. And again. Every new bloodstain documented another desperate attempt to survive. Every overturned object suggested another struggle. Every damaged display marked another moment when she tried to escape. Forensic specialists later concluded that multiple weapons were used during the assault. Rather than describing the injuries in graphic detail, investigators focused on what they revealed about the attack itself. This was not an impulsive strike followed by panic. The assault continued through repeated acts of violence involving different objects available inside the store. A knife. A hammer. A utility knife. Blunt instruments. A ligature. Each represented another decision to continue the attack rather than stop it. The changing weapons also suggested something deeply disturbing. When one object was no longer immediately available or effective, another was chosen. The violence evolved as the struggle continued. That detail would later become central to the prosecution's argument that this was deliberate, sustained, and intentional. Jana's injuries also told another story. They revealed resistance. Medical experts testified that many wounds reflected defensive actions, evidence that she attempted to shield herself and fight back against the assault. She did not collapse immediately. She struggled. She moved. She tried to survive. Imagine the physical exhaustion that must have filled those final minutes. A brightly lit retail store transformed into a battlefield. Displays that once advertised athletic achievement now surrounded a desperate struggle between 2 co-workers. The silence between moments of violence broken only by crashing merchandise, hurried footsteps, and frantic movement across polished wooden floors. Outside, life continued uninterrupted. People walked only yards away. Cars stopped at traffic lights. Restaurant conversations carried on. No one understood that behind locked glass doors, a woman was desperately trying to stay alive. The fight continued long enough for sound to escape beyond the walls. In the neighboring Apple store, employees remained inside, completing their own closing duties. At some point during the night, voices reached them. They heard two women arguing. Then screaming. Then cries that would later remain fixed in their memories forever. One voice pleaded for help. She begged for God to help her. She begged for someone, anyone, to help. Those words drifted through walls separating two businesses. Employees heard them. Managers heard them. Yet context changes everything. Arguments happen. People raise their voices. Couples fight. Co-workers disagree. From next door, without seeing what was happening, the sounds did not necessarily suggest murder. No emergency call was made. The screaming eventually stopped. Only later would those witnesses realize they had unknowingly listened to a woman's final fight for her life. That realization would remain a painful burden. Investigators would later reference those moments not to assign criminal responsibility to the neighboring employees, but because they illustrated how easily extraordinary violence can hide behind assumptions of ordinary conflict. Inside the Lululemon store, the struggle finally ended. Jana Murray succumbed to her injuries. The woman who had returned simply to help a co-worker never walked back out. The building became unnaturally quiet. For many killers, that moment marks the beginning of escape. Panic takes over. They flee before anyone arrives. But according to prosecutors, Brittany Norwood did something very different. She stayed. Not for minutes. For a considerable period of time. The violence had ended. Now deception began. Investigators believed she carefully examined the scene surrounding her. Blood covered portions of the store. Signs of the struggle stretched across multiple areas. There was no realistic way to erase what had happened. Instead, prosecutors argued, she decided to change the story rather than remove the evidence. If the murder could not disappear, perhaps responsibility could. According to the evidence presented at trial, she began creating an entirely different narrative. One that involved unknown attackers. One that transformed herself from suspect into survivor. One that would initially convince experienced investigators. She inflicted relatively minor injuries upon herself. Not severe enough to threaten her life. Just enough to appear believable. She restrained herself using plastic zip ties. She altered aspects of the crime scene to support the appearance of a violent robbery. Investigators also concluded that she staged evidence intended to suggest a sexual assault had occurred, though forensic examination later found no evidence supporting that claim. Elsewhere in the store, a pair of men's shoes was allegedly used to create misleading footprints, an attempt to suggest male intruders had entered and left the building. It was an extraordinary amount of effort. Each action required thought, time, planning, decision after decision after decision. Every minute spent staging the scene moved further away from panic and closer toward calculated deception. The contrast is difficult to ignore. Only moments earlier, unimaginable violence had consumed the building. Now, silence returned. Bright retail lights still illuminated perfectly folded clothing untouched by the struggle. The store stood locked from the outside. No customer passing the windows could possibly imagine what had happened inside. Hours slowly passed. Darkness settled completely across Bethesda. Cleaning crews worked elsewhere. Police officers answered unrelated calls throughout the city. Families slept peacefully in nearby homes. Inside the Lululemon store, one woman lay dead. Another waited beside the carefully constructed story she hoped investigators would believe. Before sunrise, everything had been arranged. The supposed survivor appeared restrained. The imagined attackers had vanished. The stage had been set. By morning, the first officers arriving at the scene would believe they were investigating a brutal attack carried out by unknown masked men. For a brief time, the deception would work. But crime scenes possess a remarkable honesty. Blood follows gravity, not imagination. Footprints reveal movement, not intention. Injuries tell their own stories. And every attempt to manufacture evidence leaves behind new evidence of its own. The lies waiting inside that brightly lit store were elaborate. They were convincing. They were carefully assembled. But they were not perfect. The truth had not disappeared beneath the staged chaos. It had simply been buried beneath layers of carefully arranged illusion, waiting patiently for investigators willing to question the story that seemed almost too terrifying not to believe. Saturday morning arrived without urgency. The shops along Bethesda Row prepared to open for another weekend. Delivery trucks rolled through quiet streets before the first wave of shoppers arrived. Coffee shops welcomed early customers escaping the lingering chill of March, while restaurant employees unlocked their doors and arranged tables for breakfast service. The neighborhood looked exactly as it always did, polished and predictable, the kind of place where routine felt almost permanent. No one passing the Lululemon storefront could have imagined that only a few feet beyond the locked glass doors, one of the most horrific crime scenes in Maryland's recent history waited in complete silence. Hours had passed since the violence ended. Inside, nothing moved. The overhead lights remained on. The carefully staged scene waited for its audience. The first indication that something was terribly wrong came when employees arrived to prepare the store for business. At first, there was only confusion. The store should have been open. Someone should have answered. Instead, something felt unusual. As access was gained and people entered the building, ordinary expectations disappeared almost instantly. The scene confronting them was unlike anything they could have prepared for. Jana Murray lay motionless. Nearby, Brittany Norwood appeared bound and injured, seemingly unconscious inside the store. Within moments, emergency calls were placed. Police officers, firefighters, and paramedics rushed toward Bethesda Row, unaware of the magnitude of what awaited them. Emergency responders are trained to remain calm regardless of what they encounter. They move with purpose. They separate emotion from procedure. They secure scenes. Treat survivors. Protect evidence. Yet even experienced responders sometimes recognize immediately that they have entered an extraordinary investigation. This was one of those moments. Paramedics quickly determined that Jana could not be saved. She had died hours earlier. Attention shifted toward the surviving employee. Brittany Norwood appeared frightened, injured, and traumatized. She was removed from the store and transported for medical evaluation. To everyone present during those first moments, she looked exactly like what she claimed to be. The lone survivor of a savage attack. Inside the building, police officers began securing every entrance. Yellow crime scene tape stretched across the storefront, transforming an upscale retail shop into an active homicide investigation. Curious pedestrians slowed their pace. Nearby business owners stepped outside to watch. News of a murder spread rapidly through the normally peaceful shopping district. Few details were available. Rumors filled the silence. Detectives from the Montgomery County Police Department soon assumed control of the investigation. Before asking who committed the crime, they first needed to understand what had happened. The initial visual impression suggested extraordinary violence. Blood appeared across multiple locations throughout the store. Display tables had been disturbed. Merchandise covered portions of the floor. Furniture sat out of place. Nothing indicated a quick assault. Everything suggested prolonged struggle. Crime scene photographers documented every angle before anything was moved. Measurements were taken. Evidence markers appeared one after another across the hardwood floor. Each stain, each footprint, each damaged object. Every item would eventually become part of a larger puzzle. Experienced homicide investigators know that crime scenes often contradict first impressions. What appears obvious during the first hour frequently changes after careful examination. For that reason, detectives avoided making immediate conclusions. Instead, they allowed the evidence to speak. Forensic specialists began working methodically through the building. Bloodstain analysts examined the direction of impact patterns. Latent fingerprint technicians searched display cases, counters, and doors. Evidence collection teams packaged clothing fibers, biological samples, and trace materials. Nothing was considered too small. Modern homicide investigations are rarely solved through dramatic confessions. They are solved through patience. A single fingerprint. One overlooked fiber. The angle of dried blood. A partial footprint. Tiny details accumulate until they reveal a narrative stronger than any witness statement. Outside, television news crews began arriving. Satellite trucks parked along nearby streets. Camera operators filmed the growing police presence. Reporters spoke quietly into microphones, repeating the limited facts then available. A homicide. One dead. One survivor. Possible unknown attackers. Residents watched from sidewalks behind police barriers. Parents walking with children changed direction rather than pass the growing crowd. Employees from neighboring businesses struggled to process what had happened only a few feet away from where they had worked the previous evening. Many remembered hearing raised voices. Some recalled screams. At the time, those sounds had seemed unfortunate, but not extraordinary. Arguments happen. Couples fight. People shout. No one imagined those cries were part of a murder. Now, memories suddenly carried enormous weight. Detectives moved from business to business interviewing anyone who had remained nearby after closing time. Every recollection mattered. Every timeline was carefully documented. Who left first? Who stayed late? Who heard unusual sounds? Who saw unfamiliar people? Investigators built the evening minute by minute. Meanwhile, Brittany Norwood gave police the account that immediately shaped the direction of the investigation. According to her statement, after she and Jana returned to the store, two unknown men wearing masks forced their way inside. She described a terrifying ordeal. The intruders allegedly assaulted both women. Jana resisted. The attackers became increasingly violent. She claimed she survived only because she eventually pretended to be dead. To detectives hearing the story for the first time, it appeared plausible. The crime scene certainly reflected extreme violence. Norwood's injuries seemed consistent with someone who had endured a brutal assault. Her emotional state reinforced that impression. At least initially. Investigators began considering the possibility that two dangerous offenders remained at large somewhere in Montgomery County. The public faced an unsettling possibility. If masked killers had invaded one business, what prevented them from attacking another? Police resources expanded quickly. Area surveillance footage was requested. Officers searched for witnesses reporting suspicious individuals. Neighborhood patrols increased. The possibility of a random violent crime demanded immediate attention. Yet even during those earliest hours, certain detectives resisted becoming emotionally attached to any single theory. Experience teaches investigators an important lesson. Crime scenes rarely lie. People sometimes do. The building itself still contained answers. Forensic teams continued documenting every room. As bloodstain experts reconstructed movement throughout the store, one conclusion became increasingly clear. The struggle had traveled extensively. Jaina had not remained in one place. She had fought across multiple areas of the building. The evidence reflected movement rather than execution. This realization profoundly shaped investigators' understanding of her final moments. She had resisted with extraordinary determination. Every change in direction, every disrupted display, every separate blood deposit represented another attempt to survive. It also demonstrated remarkable physical endurance under unimaginable circumstances. Medical examiners simultaneously began their own examination. Autopsies serve two purposes. They identify cause of death. They also reconstruct events through injury patterns. Every wound contains information. Timing, direction, force, possible weapon characteristics, relationships between injuries. The examination confirmed the overwhelming severity of the attack. The number of injuries shocked even experienced professionals accustomed to investigating violent crime. The findings also suggested something equally significant. Multiple weapons appeared to have been involved. That detail raised immediate investigative questions. Why would attackers repeatedly change weapons? Were several offenders participating? Or had a single assailant simply used whatever objects became available? The answers remained uncertain. Back inside the store, detectives continued collecting physical evidence. Nothing escaped attention. Security alarm records, telephone logs, door locks, employee schedules, inventory records. Each piece might eventually support, or contradict, the survivor's account. Investigators also examined how the store had been entered. There was no obvious indication of forced entry. No shattered front door. No damaged lock. Instead, evidence showed the building had been accessed normally using authorized procedures. That detail aligned with Brittany's explanation that she and Jaina had voluntarily returned after closing. At that stage, it did not appear suspicious. But detectives noted everything. Questions could wait. Evidence could not. Outside the investigation, the human cost of the crime was beginning to spread. Jaina's family received devastating confirmation that their daughter would never return home. Friends struggled to accept that someone they had spoken with only hours earlier was suddenly gone. Co-workers faced an impossible emotional contradiction. One colleague had died. Another had apparently survived unimaginable violence. Many naturally directed sympathy toward both women. Few could have imagined how dramatically that perception would change over the following days. News organizations across the country began covering the story. The contrast proved irresistible. A luxury athletic clothing store. A wealthy suburban shopping district. A savage homicide. An apparent survivor. National attention grew rapidly. Television commentators speculated about robbery, sexual assault, random violence, serial offenders. Every theory reflected the information available at that moment. Yet somewhere beneath the layers of blood, broken displays, and carefully arranged deception, the truth remained intact. It waited inside microscopic traces. Inside measurements. Inside patterns invisible to casual observation. The scene appeared chaotic. To trained investigators, however, chaos often conceals remarkable order. Every violent action leaves physical consequences. Every fabricated detail creates inconsistencies. Every lie must eventually compete against evidence that neither forgets nor changes. As detectives left the store late that evening, exhausted but determined, they carried boxes filled with evidence collected from nearly every corner of the building. Laboratories would soon begin analyzing DNA. Fingerprint comparisons would follow. Forensic specialists would examine clothing, fibers, footwear impressions, and blood patterns with extraordinary precision. The investigation was only beginning. For the moment, Brittany Norwood remained what she claimed to be. A traumatized survivor. The only eyewitness. The only living person able to describe what had happened after the store closed. But somewhere within the evidence already collected, tiny contradictions had begun whispering a different story. Too quietly to hear on the first day. Too subtly to attract headlines. Yet powerful enough that, once uncovered, they would transform the entire investigation and reveal that the greatest mystery was not how Jana Murray died. It was why the only surviving witness appeared to have anticipated every question police might ask, except the ones the evidence was about to answer. The first 48 hours after a homicide are often dominated by urgency. Investigators chase leads before memories fade. Surveillance footage is collected before it is overwritten. Witnesses are interviewed while conversations remain fresh in their minds. Every passing hour matters, because time has a way of quietly erasing opportunities. In the days following the murder inside the Lululemon store, detectives worked almost around the clock. Their initial objective was straightforward. Find the two masked men Brittany Norwood insisted had attacked them. According to her account, the intruders had appeared suddenly after she and Jana re-entered the store. They were described as violent, unpredictable, and determined to leave no witnesses. One allegedly focused on Jana while the other restrained Brittany. She repeated that she survived only because she pretended to be dead. The story was horrifying. It was also detailed. Detailed stories often sound convincing, because they answer questions before investigators ask them. But experienced detectives understand something important. Truth usually contains uncertainty. People who survive traumatic events often struggle to remember exact sequences, precise timelines, or small details. Memory becomes fragmented under extreme stress. Fabricated stories, on the other hand, sometimes appear unusually complete. Every question already has an answer. Every gap has been filled. Investigators did not immediately dismiss Brittany's account. Instead, they tested it. That is the foundation of homicide work. Not belief. Verification. Every statement becomes a hypothesis. Every hypothesis must survive physical evidence. Detectives divided into specialized teams. Some focused on the crime scene. Others retraced the movements of both employees throughout the previous week. Another group examined store records and company communications. Meanwhile, forensic laboratories began processing hundreds of pieces of evidence collected from inside the building. The investigation quickly expanded beyond the walls of the Lululemon store. Officers visited neighboring businesses, asking employees whether they had noticed unfamiliar people lingering nearby. Traffic cameras were reviewed. Private security systems from surrounding shops were examined. Detectives searched for any image of two masked men arriving or leaving Bethesda Row that evening. If Brittany's story was accurate, someone should have seen them. Bethesda was not isolated countryside. It was a busy commercial district. People were still dining in nearby restaurants. Employees from neighboring stores had remained after closing. Cars moved through surrounding streets. Someone, somewhere, should have noticed two violent offenders. Yet no one did. Witness after witness described an ordinary Friday evening. Nothing stood out. No suspicious vehicle. No frantic escape. No men running from the shopping district. At first, investigators considered that the attackers might simply have escaped unnoticed. It was possible. But possibilities gradually become less convincing when evidence refuses to support them. Meanwhile, detectives interviewed employees from the neighboring Apple store. Those conversations proved significant. Several employees remembered hearing raised voices during the evening. Initially, they assumed it was simply an argument. Retail districts are noisy places. People occasionally shout. Disagreements happen. But as investigators encouraged them to think carefully, the memories became more specific. They heard two women. Not men shouting. Not multiple male voices. Two women. The argument grew louder. Then came screams. Then desperate pleas for help. The words remained painfully clear in their memories because of their emotional intensity. One woman cried out repeatedly, begging for help. The sound eventually stopped. The Apple employees admitted they never called police because they believed they were overhearing a domestic dispute or workplace argument rather than a murder. Detectives understood. People interpret sounds according to expectations. Few imagine the worst. Still, those witness statements introduced the first subtle inconsistency. If two masked male attackers had immediately taken control of the situation, why did neighboring employees primarily hear two women arguing? It was only one question. One inconsistency. Hardly enough to overturn the survivor's account. But homicide investigations often begin changing direction through small contradictions rather than dramatic discoveries. Back inside the laboratory, forensic scientists continued processing biological evidence. DNA analysis requires patience. Blood samples must be identified individually. Mixtures separated. Profiles compared. Every result adds another piece to an increasingly detailed reconstruction. Investigators also examined footwear impressions left throughout the store. Bloody footprints had become one of the most striking features of the crime scene. Some appeared unusually large. Initially, they seemed to support Brittany's claim that male attackers had moved through the building. But forensic footwear specialists are trained to look beyond size alone. They examine gait, pressure distribution, direction of travel, depth of impression, wear patterns unique to particular shoes. As they mapped each print across the hardwood floor, something unexpected emerged. The footprints created a story inconsistent with fleeing attackers. Rather than showing clear paths into and out of the store, many stopped inside. Some overlapped in unnatural ways. Others appeared oddly deliberate, almost as though someone wanted investigators to notice them. Experienced detectives have a saying. Evidence created naturally behaves naturally. Evidence created intentionally often tries too hard. No conclusion was reached immediately. But questions multiplied. Investigators next turned their attention to Brittany's injuries. She had unquestionably been hurt. That much was obvious. The issue was not whether injuries existed. The issue was whether those injuries matched the attack she described. Medical experts documented every wound carefully. Cuts, bruises, abrasions, their locations, their depth, their direction. Everything was photographed and measured. When those findings were compared against Jana's injuries, the contrast became difficult to ignore. Jana had sustained catastrophic trauma during what evidence suggested was an extended fight for survival. Brittany's injuries, while real, appeared dramatically less severe. That alone proved nothing. Survivors often experience different levels of injury than victims. But forensic medicine examines patterns rather than assumptions. Some wounds displayed characteristics commonly associated with hesitation or self-infliction. Others appeared superficial compared with the level of violence allegedly directed toward her. Again, investigators did not rush toward conclusions. They simply noted another inconsistency. Then came another. Bloodstain analysts reconstructed the position of Brittany after the assault. According to her account, she had remained bound and motionless for hours until discovered the following morning. Gravity, however, tells its own story. Blood flowing from facial wounds follows predictable paths depending upon body position. Several analysts observed that dried blood patterns appeared inconsistent, with someone lying exactly as Brittany described throughout the night. Instead, they suggested changes in posture after bleeding had occurred. It was another quiet contradiction. Small, technical, easy for the public to overlook, impossible for homicide investigators to ignore. At the same time, detectives obtained store employment records and internal company documents. Among routine paperwork, they encountered information regarding concerns over missing merchandise. Inventory discrepancies had prompted internal attention. Investigators learned that Brittany Norwood had reportedly been questioned regarding suspected theft from the store. Suddenly, motive entered the investigation. Until then, police had focused primarily on identifying unknown intruders. Now another possibility emerged. What if no outsiders had entered the building at all? What if the conflict began between the only two people known to be inside? Motive alone never solves a homicide. Countless people experience workplace conflict without committing murder. But motive provides context. When combined with forensic inconsistencies, it changes investigative priorities. Detectives quietly shifted their strategy. Rather than searching exclusively for unidentified suspects, they began testing whether Brittany herself could have committed the crime. Importantly, this transition occurred privately. Publicly, investigators revealed very little. They continued gathering evidence while allowing Brittany's version of events to remain largely unchallenged. Experienced interrogators understand that premature confrontation can destroy valuable opportunities. A suspect who believes investigators remain convinced may continue repeating the same story. Every repetition creates additional details. Additional details create additional chances for contradiction. Meanwhile, laboratory reports continued arriving. No unknown DNA profile emerged pointing toward mysterious attackers. No unidentified fingerprints suddenly appeared. No evidence clearly established the presence of two masked men moving through the store during the murder. The absence of evidence is not always evidence of absence. Detectives knew that. Criminals can wear gloves. They can avoid leaving DNA. They can escape unnoticed. Yet as day followed day, the complete lack of supporting evidence became increasingly difficult to reconcile with Brittany's detailed narrative. The investigation reached an uncomfortable stage. Everything detectives expected to find if Brittany were telling the truth seemed strangely missing. Everything they would expect if the attack involved only the two employees seemed increasingly present. Still, they remained cautious. Murder cases are won through proof, not intuition. They continued rebuilding the timeline minute by minute. Telephone records. Alarm logs. Witness interviews. Medical findings. Forensic analysis. Every independent source was compared against Brittany's account. The more comparisons they made, the more fragile that account became. Outside the investigation, public sympathy continued surrounding the surviving employee. Television interviews described her as fortunate to be alive. Commentators discussed the psychological trauma she must have endured. Community members expressed compassion. No one yet understood that detectives were quietly beginning to view the case through an entirely different lens. Behind closed doors, investigative meetings grew increasingly focused. Large evidence boards displayed photographs connected by timelines and handwritten notes. Questions covered whiteboards. Where were the unidentified attackers? Why was there no corroborating physical evidence? Why did witness statements differ? Why did injury patterns fail to align? Each answer generated another question. Each question narrowed the investigation. By the end of that first week, detectives no longer believed they were chasing unknown masked men across Maryland. Instead, they found themselves confronting a far more unsettling possibility. The person everyone believed had survived the attack may have been the person who created it. The transformation in the investigation did not occur because of one spectacular discovery. There was no hidden surveillance video. No dramatic confession. No anonymous witness suddenly appearing at police headquarters. The case changed because science proved more patient than deception. Every staged detail had been examined. Every statement had been tested. Every inconsistency had been allowed to speak. And together, those quiet contradictions were about to collapse an elaborate lie that had fooled nearly everyone during the first terrifying hours of the investigation. The investigation did not turn because of a single dramatic revelation. There was no detective bursting into a room announcing that the case had been solved. No forgotten security camera suddenly revealed the truth. No anonymous phone call identified the killer. Instead, the breakthrough emerged the way many real homicide investigations do. Slowly. Methodically. One inconsistency at a time. By the middle of March, nearly a week had passed since Jana Murray was killed. The enormous volume of forensic evidence collected from the Lululemon store had begun returning from laboratories. Detectives gathered in briefing rooms each morning, comparing reports that, individually, seemed modest. Together, however, they painted an entirely different picture. The first major breakthrough centered on something that could not be manipulated after the crime had ended. Time. Electronic records rarely lie. The store's security alarm system documented exactly when the building had been locked and reopened. Telephone records confirmed communication between Brittany Norwood and Jana Murray shortly after the store had closed. Investigators reconstructed the timeline minute by minute. The sequence made perfect sense if Jana had returned simply to help a co-worker retrieve a forgotten item. It made far less sense if unknown attackers had somehow entered unnoticed at exactly the same moment. Detectives asked themselves a simple question. If two masked men had been waiting, where had they been hiding? There was no evidence of forced entry. No indication that anyone had concealed themselves inside before closing. No witness reported suspicious individuals lingering near the building. No surveillance camera captured strangers approaching the store. The timeline increasingly suggested that only two people had voluntarily entered after business hours. Jana and Brittany. Attention then shifted back to the physical evidence collected from inside the building. Crime scene analysts had completed one of the most detailed bloodstain reconstructions ever performed in a Montgomery County homicide. Every drop had been mapped. Every impact pattern measured. Every smear documented. Blood does something remarkable. It follows the laws of physics. It cannot be persuaded. It cannot be coached. It cannot participate in deception. When analysts reconstructed movement throughout the store, they concluded that the struggle evolved in ways inconsistent with Brittany's description of events. Rather than supporting an attack carried out by multiple intruders, the blood evidence reflected repeated movement between two primary participants. Jana's desperate attempts to escape became increasingly clear. Investigators traced paths through different sections of the store. Some stains reflected rapid movement. Others showed pauses. Some suggested falls followed by renewed attempts to continue moving. The evidence portrayed extraordinary determination. Jana fought for her life until she simply could not continue. Meanwhile, forensic footwear specialists completed another critical analysis. The oversized shoe impressions that initially appeared to support Brittany's story received microscopic examination. Their findings surprised even experienced detectives. The impressions lacked characteristics expected from genuine movement by separate individuals. Instead, several appeared unusually deliberate. Pressure distribution remained inconsistent. Stride patterns failed to match natural walking. Some prints overlapped existing blood in ways suggesting they had been placed after portions of the struggle had already concluded. The supposed evidence of male intruders now appeared increasingly artificial. Detectives realized someone had not merely attempted to conceal a crime. Someone had attempted to manufacture one. The investigation accelerated. Attention returned once more to Brittany's injuries. Medical specialists met directly with detectives, carefully explaining why certain wounds raised concern. They emphasized that no single injury proved self-infliction. That was not how forensic medicine worked. Instead, experts evaluated injuries collectively. Their location, depth, direction, accessibility, healing characteristics. When considered together, Brittany's wounds appeared inconsistent with prolonged assault by homicidal attackers. Several superficial cuts occupied areas easily reachable by her dominant hand. Bruising patterns differed dramatically from those sustained by Jana. Most importantly, the injuries lacked the overwhelming severity expected if two violent offenders had attacked both women with equal determination. Then came another devastating finding. Forensic pathologists revisited the blood flow documented on Brittany's face. The dried patterns demonstrated that gravity had acted while she was upright, or in changing positions. According to her account, she had remained bound and motionless for hours. The physical evidence disagreed. It suggested movement after bleeding occurred. Again, science quietly contradicted narrative. Detectives now possessed something increasingly valuable. Independent pieces of evidence all pointing toward the same conclusion without relying upon speculation. Yet perhaps the most significant breakthrough came not from biology or bloodstains. It came from motive. Investigators continued interviewing Lululemon employees, regional management, and corporate representatives. Those conversations established a clearer picture of events leading up to the murder. According to testimony later presented at trial, Brittany Norwood had become the subject of an internal theft investigation involving store merchandise. Items reportedly missing from inventory had drawn management attention. Jana Murray, as store manager, occupied a position requiring her to report policy violations honestly. She could not simply ignore suspected misconduct. Detectives began viewing the relationship between the two women through an entirely different lens. This was no longer simply a workplace friendship interrupted by random violence. It had become a relationship strained by professional responsibility. Investigators theorized that Brittany feared exposure. Losing employment would have been damaging enough. Being formally accused of theft carried consequences, extending beyond a single job. Embarrassment. Financial uncertainty. Loss of reputation. Whether those fears reflected reality or perception mattered less than one crucial question. Had they become powerful enough to motivate murder? Evidence increasingly suggested they had. As detectives assembled every report into one comprehensive timeline, Brittany's story continued collapsing. The masked men left no DNA. No fingerprints. No reliable surveillance images. No eyewitnesses. No escape route. No convincing physical evidence at all. Instead, virtually every confirmed fact placed only two people inside the locked building. Jayna and Brittany. Investigators reached the point where continuing to search for fictional attackers risked ignoring the overwhelming evidence already collected. The case had changed. Completely. On March 18, 2011, exactly 1 week after the murder, detectives believed they had reached the threshold required for arrest. That morning unfolded far differently than the previous 7 days. Instead of searching neighborhoods for unknown suspects, investigators prepared to arrest the woman many people still believed was the crime's only survivor. Brittany Norwood was taken into custody and charged with first-degree murder. The announcement stunned the community. Only days earlier, media coverage had portrayed her as another victim. Now prosecutors alleged she had orchestrated both the killing and the elaborate deception afterward. Public reaction shifted almost instantly. People struggled to reconcile two completely different images. The terrified employee rescued from a horrifying attack. The calculated killer accused of staging one of the most deceptive crime scenes investigators had encountered. How could both descriptions involve the same person? Detectives addressed reporters carefully. They avoided discussing sensitive forensic evidence. Instead, they confirmed that the investigation had evolved as additional facts emerged. Behind those restrained public statements stood hundreds of hours of painstaking forensic work. Thousands of photographs. Hundreds of evidence items. Dozens of interviews. Laboratory analyses performed with extraordinary precision. The arrest represented not intuition, but accumulation. Every contradiction. Every inconsistency. Every scientific finding had slowly dismantled the original narrative. Meanwhile, Jayna's family experienced conflicting emotions. The arrest provided relief that investigators believed they had identified the person responsible. Yet it also deepened the tragedy. The woman accused of murdering Jayna had not been a stranger lurking in darkness. She had been someone Jayna trusted enough to unlock a door for after closing. That realization carried its own heartbreak. Trust had become the weapon that allowed the crime to occur. As prosecutors prepared for trial, they faced an enormous responsibility. They would need to explain not only how Jayna died, but why the evidence proved Brittany's carefully constructed story could not possibly be true. Every forensic expert would play an essential role. Bloodstain analysts, medical examiners, footwear specialists, DNA experts. Each would contribute one piece of the larger narrative. Unlike fictional courtroom dramas, real homicide prosecutions rarely depend upon dramatic surprises. They depend upon patience. The patient accumulation of facts until alternative explanations become impossible to sustain. By the time Brittany Norwood entered the courtroom as a defendant rather than a victim, investigators believed they had achieved exactly that. The elaborate deception that initially diverted an entire homicide investigation had survived only a matter of days. Science had caught up. Evidence had caught up. Truth had caught up. What remained was the final test. Not whether detectives believed Brittany was guilty, but whether 12 jurors, presented with every photograph, every forensic report, every witness statement, and every painstaking reconstruction of those final 20 minutes inside the Lululemon store, would reach the same conclusion. The battle for justice was no longer taking place inside a blood-stained retail store. It was about to unfold inside a courtroom, where every carefully constructed lie would be measured against evidence that had never changed from the moment it was left behind on that March night. The courtroom was quieter than many people expected. There were no dramatic confrontations waiting behind every question. No surprise witness hidden until the final moment. No emotional confession that would suddenly explain everything. Real murder trials rarely resemble the stories told in movies. They move carefully, patiently. Every statement must be supported. Every conclusion must rest upon evidence rather than emotion. For Jana Murray's family, however, none of those legal procedures softened the pain of returning to the events of March 11, 2011. Each day inside the courtroom meant reliving the worst night of their lives. They entered carrying memories of the woman they loved. They left carrying photographs of the place where she died. The contrast was almost unbearable. On one side of the courtroom sat prosecutors representing the state of Maryland. Their responsibility was enormous. They were not merely trying to prove that Brittany Norwood had caused Jana's death. They needed to convince 12 jurors beyond a reasonable doubt that the killing had been deliberate and premeditated. The distinction mattered. The defense did not deny that Brittany was responsible for Jana's death. Instead, they challenged the prosecution's interpretation of what had happened. According to the defense, the violence had erupted during a confrontation between two co-workers. An argument had spiraled out of control. The killing, they argued, was not planned in advance. It was an explosion of emotion. A tragedy. Not premeditated murder. That single legal distinction would shape nearly every moment of the trial. The prosecution responded by presenting a timeline built piece by piece from forensic science. Rather than relying on speculation about what either woman had been thinking, prosecutors focused on actions that could be demonstrated through evidence. The first witnesses established the ordinary nature of the evening. Store employees described closing procedures. Corporate representatives explained company policies. Investigators reconstructed how Jana had already left the store before receiving the phone call asking her to return. Jurors learned that she had willingly unlocked the building because she believed a co-worker had forgotten an important personal item. That detail carried emotional weight. It demonstrated trust. Jana had not entered expecting conflict. She entered expecting to help. Next came the crime scene investigators. Photographs filled courtroom screens. The prosecution guided jurors carefully through the layout of the store. Display tables. Changing rooms. Hallways. Storage areas. Bloodstains located throughout multiple sections of the building. Without relying on graphic descriptions, investigators explained what the physical evidence revealed. The struggle had not occurred in one place. It had traveled. Again and again. Jana continued moving. She continued resisting. She continued fighting. Bloodstain analysts explained how movement through the store allowed them to reconstruct portions of the attack. Patterns demonstrated changes in direction. Repeated confrontations. Attempts to escape. This was not a sudden collapse following a single blow. It was a prolonged struggle lasting many minutes. Medical experts followed. Their testimony became some of the most difficult evidence for everyone inside the courtroom. The autopsy findings established the extraordinary extent of Jana's injuries. Experts described how multiple weapons had been involved during the assault. Rather than indicating a brief emotional outburst, prosecutors argued that the changing weapons demonstrated repeated opportunities to stop. Each new weapon represented another decision. Another choice. Another continuation of violence. Defense attorneys challenged those conclusions. They argued that extreme emotional conflict can produce chaotic behavior. Changing weapons did not automatically prove planning. People acting irrationally sometimes make irrational decisions. The defense urged jurors to distinguish between brutality and premeditation. It was a legally important argument. The prosecution answered by returning once more to what happened after Jana died. If the killing had truly been an uncontrolled emotional explosion, what happened next? Jurors heard testimony regarding the staged crime scene. Plastic zip ties. Artificially created evidence. The fabricated appearance of a sexual assault. Footwear impressions intended to suggest unknown male attackers. Self-inflicted injuries. The prosecution argued that these actions required calm decision-making after the violence ended. Time had passed. Opportunities existed to call emergency services. Instead, prosecutors said, Brittany spent those valuable minutes creating a false narrative. That behavior, they argued, reflected consciousness of guilt. Forensic footwear specialists then described their examination of the bloody shoe impressions. Using enlarged photographs and comparison techniques, they explained why the prints failed to resemble natural movement by fleeing attackers. Instead, several appeared deliberately manufactured. Jurors listened carefully. Complex scientific testimony often risks losing attention. Yet in this trial, every expert addressed the same central question from a different perspective. Did the evidence support Brittany's story? Again and again, the answer remained consistent. No. Medical experts reinforced that conclusion. They compared Brittany's injuries with the attack she described. Their testimony did not suggest she was uninjured. Rather, they explained why the wounds appeared inconsistent with surviving the prolonged assault she attributed to two masked men. Some injuries appeared superficial. Others demonstrated characteristics difficult to reconcile with her account. The prosecution emphasized that science, not opinion, guided these conclusions. Another powerful moment came when investigators described interviews with employees from the neighboring Apple store. Jurors learned that witnesses heard two women arguing. Then screaming. Then desperate cries for help. No one reported hearing multiple male voices. Those recollections aligned more closely with prosecutors' theory than Brittany's version of events. Defense attorneys reminded jurors that sound can be misleading. Walls distort voices. Memory changes over time. People reconstruct events after learning new information. They urged caution before treating recollections as certainty. It was a reasonable point. But prosecutors had never relied upon witness testimony alone. Each witness simply strengthened conclusions already supported by physical evidence. Perhaps the most compelling aspect of the prosecution's case involved what investigators never found. No unknown DNA. No unidentified fingerprints. No credible evidence placing two masked men inside the store. No reliable indication that anyone other than Jana and Brittany occupied the building during the fatal struggle. Absence alone does not prove guilt. Combined with everything else, however, it became increasingly difficult to ignore. Throughout the proceedings, Brittany Norwood maintained her innocence regarding first-degree murder. Her legal team acknowledged responsibility for Jana's death while rejecting the allegation that the killing had been planned beforehand. The distinction became the central issue presented to jurors. Had Brittany intentionally lured Jana back to the store and murdered her? Or had events escalated unexpectedly into catastrophic violence? Closing arguments reflected those competing visions. The prosecution asked jurors to examine decisions rather than emotions. The phone call requesting Jana's return. The prolonged assault. The repeated use of different weapons. The extensive staging afterward. Every step, prosecutors argued, reflected deliberate choices. The defense urged compassion without excusing responsibility. Human beings sometimes lose control. Fear produces irrational behavior. Panic encourages poor decisions after traumatic events. The staging, they argued, reflected desperate attempts to avoid consequences rather than proof that murder had been planned in advance. The jury retired to deliberate. Inside the courtroom, silence settled over everyone waiting. Families, attorneys, investigators, reporters. Weeks of testimony had ended. Now 12 strangers carried the responsibility of reaching a verdict that would forever define the case. Deliberations continued as jurors reviewed evidence and legal instructions. They examined timelines, witness testimony, scientific reports, photographs. The law required proof beyond a reasonable doubt. Nothing less. When they finally returned to the courtroom, every person present understood that another life was about to change forever. The foreperson stood. The verdict was read. Guilty. Brittany Norwood was convicted of first-degree murder. The prosecution's reconstruction of the crime had persuaded the jury. The evidence demonstrated not simply responsibility for Jana's death, but intentional, premeditated murder. For Jana's family, the verdict brought relief mixed with profound sorrow. Justice could acknowledge wrongdoing. It could not restore the future they had lost. No verdict could replace birthdays that would never be celebrated. Family gatherings forever missing one familiar face. Conversations permanently unfinished. Several months later, on January 27, 2012, Brittany Norwood returned to court for sentencing. The judge considered the extraordinary violence of the crime, the evidence presented throughout the trial, and the jury's findings. The sentence reflected the gravity of those conclusions. Life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. The decision ensured that Brittany Norwood would spend the remainder of her life behind prison walls. As deputies escorted her from the courtroom, one chapter of the case came to an end. But for many people connected to the tragedy, another chapter had only just begun. Jana's family still faced the impossible task of rebuilding lives shaped by unimaginable loss. Co-workers continued questioning whether anything could have prevented that terrible night. Investigators carried memories of one of the most disturbing crime scenes they had ever examined. And across the country, millions of people who followed the trial were left confronting a deeply unsettling reality. The greatest danger that night had not come from strangers waiting in the darkness. It had come from trust placed in someone standing under the same bright lights, wearing the same company logo, and asking for what seemed like one small favor.